Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the Ryder Gambit, which is a very aggressive line in the Blackmar Diemer Gambit, which starts out with d4, d5, and then e4, gambiting a pawn on e4, and then playing knight to c3. The main line continues with knight f6, simple development move, also protects the pawn on e4. Then white plays f3, and after e takes, then knight takes f3. This is what you normally see in the Blackmar Diemer, preparing for the light square bishop to get involved into the game. If white wants to castle on the king side, very similar to the king's gambit where that rook is on the f-file, just putting a lot of pressure on the f7 square in the king side for black. But if white doesn't want to play knight f3 and protect the pawn on d4, they have another option, and that is the Ryder Gambit, playing queen takes on f3. And you can see it's a gambit on top of a gambit. White already gave up a pawn and material early on, but now they're also giving up this additional pawn if black wants to take it because the knight's not on f3. White's not protecting the pawn on d4. Now, black does not have to take it. There's a few options. We'll look at a few of them. One I think is pretty common is going to just be a6. This stops the move bishop to b5, which is pretty common from white. You could also just see knight to c6, adding another central minor piece to the board. I think this makes a lot of sense. And then lastly, we will look at if the queen just takes on d4. This will be the most common that you'll see, but I do want to give you some options in case they don't play the main line. So let's go ahead and first look at a6 as the first option for black. Now from here, we're just going to push forward with d5. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is we want to stop the immediate threat that black has, and that is to play knight c6. If you look at where are they going to continue from here, well, they want to get their knight involved into the game. It's never coming to a6 anyway. That's a terrible move. But they can't come to c6 now. That's blocked off. Can't come to d7. That's just blocking off their light square bishop and their queen. And also the pawn on d5, well, it was on d4, is not protected by any of white's pieces, but on d5, it's now protected by both the knight and the queen here. And so black can't take. The white has too many defenders here for black to take. And so black has to come up with other options. Now, we'll look at two here. One is if they decide to go ahead and push forward with their pawn, they could also try to get other material involved into the game. They can't get their dark square bishop involved into the game yet, so maybe they bring their light square bishop involved. This bishop is protected by the knight on f6, but we can just play queen g3. And yes, the queen is no longer protecting the pawn, but the pawn's actually still protected because of an additional threat that we have, and that's just taking the bishop. So if the knight takes, well, we can just take the knight, and if the queen takes, we take their bishop, and now we have three minor pieces to their two minor pieces, and we're going to be ahead in this game. So I don't think they would do that, so they have to come up with another option. We're attacking the bishop. If they just want to retreat their bishop, that's fine with us. If they decide to hold on to their bishop on g4, they might try something like h5. Okay, well, that holds on to it here. But then we can play bishop g5. I think this is better than just playing h3. I like to get more pieces involved into the attack. The reason bishop to g5 is really good is for two main reasons. One is if they move their knight, because it somewhat looks like a trap that, hey, they move it. But as soon as they do move it, let's say knight takes on d5, we're now pinning down this pawn right here on e7. The pawn really wants to move, so the dark square bishop would get involved into the game, but the queen would then fall. So we can play h3 in this position, force the black to do something. More than likely, they take on c3. We take with our queen. Again, if they don't play these moves, I think it's a mistake. I'm kind of showing you optimal lines for both sides. Now they have to play their bishop, so maybe bishop to f5, but then we play rook d1. Again, this opens up for this rook to really control this d file. They still can't move their pawn on the e file because of our bishop. It's just a huge pain for them to have to deal with. Now, if we come back, instead of the knight taking on d5, what if instead they just decide to play, or if we come back one move after bishop to g5, what if they come down and play h4? Well, they can't really, because now we can just take with our bishop on h4. So that's another reason why I like playing bishop to g5, is because we stop the threat of them coming down here. We also, depending on where they go, they don't have to take the pawn on d5. We can go and castle on the queen side if we move this bishop away. We can't right now, can't castle through check, but if they decide to not move this, we can always play h3 at a later time. That is even more so weaken our king side, but then we can force the bishop away, castle on the queen side, and have a pretty strong attack. So that's how I would approach it if they play bishop to g4 early on. Next option is if they push forward with e5. Okay, well, in this position, I think it's just best to play en passant. Now, if you're not familiar with en passant, just know that this is an actual move. You can play pawn takes here on e6. Yes, it looks pretty funky, but it's a real move. You have one opportunity to play that, and then you can't do it again in this particular situation. Now, again, if they play two moves up, then you can play en passant and take. Have another video on that if you want to take a look. I think they're probably going to retake with their bishop, get material involved into the game. If they don't, I think it would be a huge mistake. Like, what are they really going to take with their pawn? Weaken their king side, have an isolated pawn on the e-file. That would be a catastrophe, I think. So bishop takes on e6 is the play. But then you can see as soon as they move that light square bishop, we have the queen on f3. Part of the reason you play the Ryder Gambit is to have a very active queen. If you're one of these players that likes to have your queen active, this is going to be a good one for you because you can swing in with queen takes on b7. Now, the rook is under attack. They really have to play knight to d7. Knight to c6 would just be a catastrophe because when we could just easily take it for free here. So knight to d7, really the only option that they have here. And then we can play bishop f4, getting more material involved into the game. And now the queen and the bishop are both eyeing down the c7 square. And black almost has to play rook to b8. If they don't, it would be another huge mistake. So trying to show you what they should play, or if you're black, what you should be playing. And if they don't, you should be looking for ways to capitalize on that. Because white's next move is going to be queen takes on c7. And if they play something else instead of this rook to b8, we can just take the pawn on a6 if we wanted to. We can take with our bishop as well on c7. So we have some options depending on where black goes. Maybe they take with their queen. We take their queen. They come down on b2. Here's where things get somewhat interesting. We need to play bishop to d3. Now, if you look at it and say, well, why don't we just take this pawn on a6? Well, bishop takes on a6 is actually a big mistake for white. The reason it's a mistake is because black has the move bishop b4, pinning down our knight to the king. There's no great square. We could always play knight e2, but then they can just take our pawn. They're just gobbling up so much material here. In these gambit type games, you want to have the aggression. We don't have that at all. King to d1, probably best because we don't want them to just take with their bishop freely. And then after we take, they take with their rook. So king to d1 says, yeah, if you take here, we're going to go ahead and take your rook on c2. So they could just take with their rook. We take, they take our knight here. But it's still pretty awkward. You can see they're attacking our rook on a1. And this is just not a good setup for white. You can see how different it is. Just because we thought we could easily take that pawn on a6, if we come back, instead, we play the better move of bishop d3 instead of taking the pawn. Now, if they come down and play bishop to b4, we can still play the knight to e2, but they don't have a good take here. They can't just take the pawn on c2, as we said before. If they take the knight on c3, we can just take with our knight. So it's well defended in this position. Eventually, we can get this pawn on a6, but just not right away. So those were some variations if they play a6. I think more common than a6 would be knight to c6 and queen takes on d4. So we'll go over those. Knight to c6, we're going to be playing bishop to b5, pinning down that knight to the king right here. Now they have a few options. It does sort of look like it's a trap. Hey, we just keep wanting you to take that pawn on d4. And if they didn't take it before, maybe they take it now, but this would actually be a big mistake. We can take with their bishop. If they take with their pawn, hey, all of a sudden, we fork their rook. They have no real way to continue from this. You can see that if they play bishop to d7, this would be a catastrophe. Even if they play queen to d7, we could just take their rook. These are all bad moves. They could play king to d1, then we just take their rook. How do they really continue from here? So that would be a big mistake if they take with their queen on d4. Part of the reason I like playing this bishop to b5, pins down this knight, they can't do much. Also, I always want to give my opponent the opportunity to make a mistake. Now, if they play a6, very similar in that this is a bad move because we can still play bishop takes on c6. If they take with their pawn, we're coming up here, queen takes c6, check. Now, they do have bishop d7. Yeah, that's an option. We can just come back to c4, and I think this is a pretty good setup for white. Now, if we come back, what if instead of playing a6, they play the preferred move, and that's just bishop to d7. Now we can play knight to e2. The reason we play this is getting ready to castle on the king side, similar to a king's gambit where you have the f-file semi-open for the rook to just rain down. You can do that. You can get your dark square bishop involved into the game. This light square bishop on d7 is blocking the queen on d8. They have none of their other pawns have moved at all, so they will have to do something if they want to get their dark square bishop involved into the game. So just like any gambit, you want to have something in the form of compensation, and so you have to be very, very aggressive. If you play normal gambits, you definitely want to be somewhat aggressive. In the Ryder Gambit, because you're potentially giving up 2 pawns, even though they have not taken the d4 pawn for the extra material, you still need to be extremely aggressive in this opening. The last variation we're going to look at is if they take with their queen on d4. I think this is going to be the most common that you'll see. We're going to play bishop to e3, getting material involved into the game, attacking the queen, forcing it to move. They should be playing queen to g4. Remember, they're now up 2 pawns in material, and so if they can trade down, specifically the queens, that's going to be very good for black. Anytime you're up in material, you want to trade down because you get to the end, your opponent doesn't have a lot of material, and you have more material than they do. As long as there's a ton of material on the board, it doesn't always matter how much your opponent has, as long as you have the most material involved into the action. That's why you want to be very, very aggressive in these type of games. So you have some options. I like to bring the queen back to f2 in this spot because I don't like trading off the queens. If I'm going to give up 2 pawns, I want to have my most valuable pieces on the board. Don't want to trade off that queen. So if you look at it and say, oh, you can castle on the queen side. Yes, you can, but then they're just going to take with their queen here. Yes, we can take with our knight with some tempo. We have more material that has developed, but it's still difficult, especially without that queen, to really get a strong advantage down to pawns. So I like to bring the queen to f2. Not the easiest situation for white, I'll be honest. If you've played this before, you're definitely going to have a tough sledding if your opponent is pretty competent. But hey, if you like to be aggressive, the Ryder Gambit definitely allows you to do that. So I think they would usually play e5. They need to open up, expand the open, the middle of the board, get both of their bishops involved, castle so they have some safety. If you're playing against a gambit, you want to make sure that your king's not exposed because your opponent's usually going to be attacking that. From here, we could play knight to f3, getting more material involved into the game. We're going to be looking to get our light square bishop involved into the game, attack our opponent, castle, and get our rooks involved before our opponent can do anything. That is the main game plan, especially if they play queen takes on d4. Down 2 pawns, you have to be even more aggressive. So that is an overview of the Ryder Gambit, one of the more popular lines in the Blackmar Diemer Gambit. But let me know what you guys think about this opening. If you've played it before, or if you have other aggressive lines that you want me to do a video on, let me know that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.